Hi everybody, welcome back. This is the second part of our Tamiya double Tomcat build. These are the 1/48 scale kits. We're doing an A and a D. And the A's got quite a bit of aftermarket on it, which is going to be a main part of this second part of the series. In the first part we got the cockpits done on both. And obviously apart from the seats, we're going to do those later on in the series. Now, one of the aftermarket sets that I'm fitting on the A is an undercarriage bay set, and the main gear bays, we've got the nose one in part one, but the main gear bays, which are these resin parts, these are from Minicraft Collection, they'll come into play in this episode because the fuselage obviously contains the wheelbase. Now in the Tamiya kit, these are moulded in to the bottom plate, which is this large part, but there are also some details in the roof, if you like, contained in the top fuselage plate. So we're going to have a bit of a job on the A to get the resin wheel bay to fit in. The added complication for that is that I'm also going to be fitting this, which is an air intake set. These are seamless intakes. So what I want to do in this episode is just to make sure that all that's going to go together without interfering with each other. We've also got the wing sweep mechanism that goes in at this point. At least the stubs of the wings do, and all the mechanism on the inside of the fuselage goes in at this point. So there's quite a lot going on in this central area of the fuselage, and there's plenty of potential there, I think, for things to go wrong if we don't test fit and make sure that everything's going to be compatible. Now, one thing that will help us with that is to build the Tamiya kit straight from the box for the D. So if we build up the undercarriage bays as Tamiya intended from the box, together with the intakes and the wing fold or the wing sweep mechanism, we should be able to work out what the structure is like, and that will help us as a guide to starting to cut some of these parts for the A version and the resin undercarriage bays. So it's one of the advantages of having two models on the go simultaneously. So the first job to do is to get the parts cut out for the D, and we'll start to put together the intakes and we'll cut the parts out for the wheelbase. We'll do a dry fit and see how it all goes together. These are the intake ramps that we're putting together at this point. So this is just a dry fit at the moment. I'll paint weather all these separate bulkheads and then bring them all together once they're all done. Here we've got some of Tamiya's famous polycaps. So that's all the underside ready for the first step. just deal with the top panel here, and this is where we introduce the wing sweep mechanism. So we just need to make sure that when we're engaging these teeth, that when swept fully back, the rear edge here is in a straight line. And we have some hardware. Just tighten these screws down for the pivot, not over tight. If you do, it'll just strip the plastic. So just finger tight. That's all that's needed. And this is quite a clever design really, because a lot of kits you would have the whole wing on this mechanism, but Tamiya enable you to just plug the actual wings in later on in the build. So that's useful. Just join the two parts of the upper fuselage together. And at this point we need to look for a little step here. It looks as though the parts don't go together, but that's correct. We'd want to see that little step between the two parts. So that's all good. We just let this upper fuselage dry thoroughly. In the meantime, I'm going to get some primer on all the undercarriage parts. These are the Tamiya intakes, which are in two halves. They're not a bad fit at all, should be able to make a decent job of hiding that join. So Tamiya have got a nice knack with these intakes now. Even though the two halves, they position the join at the top corner here and down at the bottom, and it's just done in such a way that it's the least obvious place to have the join, rather than here right in the middle. So these parts where we've got the seam is a long way back, as you can see in the intake trunking, so I don't think that join's going to be much of a problem really. We've got a couple of ejector pin marks on the bottom of the intake there that I'll try to remove. So that's a really nice fit, but doing this with the Tamiya parts just tells us something now about the A version where we've got the resin bay, because this intake section here contains at its lower edge part of the undercarriage bay along this side here. The equivalent to that is this part of the resin. This is the opposite bay, but you can see what I mean. Goes in like that on the opposite side, which means that we're going to have to do some surgery to this intake trunking. Be very careful about it while we're doing it. So this test fit, apart from being good practice really for putting the model together when it's a fairly complicated assembly like this, we've got the benefit as well of giving us a bit of a test bed really, and a clearer idea about how the resin undercarriage bay is going to go in. So we'll press on with this D, and get some paint on these parts, we can start to do a little bit of assembly, I think. So just glue these intakes together now. They're pre-painted, as you can see, and the fit is very good on these parts, as I've mentioned before. So all I'm going to do is bring them together and apply some extra thin glue onto the outside of the join. And don't be shy with this, we want plenty of glue in that join, and if anything I'm looking for a little bit to seep through onto the inside, and that will just help conceal the join. And what we can do is just move the join around a little bit just to make sure that that glue comes right to the surface on the inside, and another squirt of the white on the inside there will just conceal it even more, so hopefully we'll get a fairly seam free intake. The other intakes are these seamless ones, and as you can see they're already cast in white. When I say cast I mean 3D printed. It's not the same thing these days. Now they look a little bit translucent, but I think when they're enclosed we're not going to get any light shining through from behind, so they should be okay. I'm going to leave those. Okay, so another coat of Mr. Surfacer on the inside of these, and a final rub down, this time with some 3000 grit sanding sponge. That's just got the final one or two little imperfections out, and we've now got a pretty much seamless intake. Now they've taken obviously a bit more work than the resin ones, but the end result is just the same really, and particularly the depth of the Tomcat intake trunking here means that these are set quite a long way back, and when everything's darkened up it's very difficult to spot any flaws in the join. So I'm happy enough with those as they are. Right, so we're ready to do some weathering on these undercarriage bays on the D. So these have had a coat of Tamiya matte white. This is a lacquer paint, LP4 I think it is, misted on over a primer of Mr. Surfacer black. So we've got a little bit of shading going on, and now I want to just add to that with some panel liner. Now I have applied a coat of Tamiya lacquer gloss varnish over these parts. That's LP9, and that's just to hold the wash next to the detail rather than staining the overall paintwork. So we should be able to just drop this in and see it run around the moulded in detail. We'll do a dry brush over the top of this once we've flatted all these parts down. It's a good idea when you're doing this step just to have a little bit of enamel thinners. This is actually white spirit, but it does the same job, and that just helps you blend some of this wash in a little bit if you've got a bit too much on. It just helps the wash run around. And it kind of evens things out a little bit so you don't have any blobs anywhere. If you dry the brush, you can suck the excess off the surface as well if you've got the wash where you don't want it. I like this step, it just adds an extra dimension to the parts rather than just having them plain white in this case. So I'm just wetting it there with the thinners, and as you can see it just helps the wash to flow a bit better. So these are the intakes, which also contain one of the undercarriage bulkheads, so we need to do the work on this as well. This is the tricky section of the intake that we're going to have to remove on the A version to fit the resin wheel bay, which I'm warned by a few that have done it before me is not an easy job, so we'll see how that goes. Okay, so that needs to dry thoroughly now. We want the wash to be completely dry before we do any more work on it. Once it is, I'll get it back to the spray booth and get a coat of flat varnish on. So while we're waiting for that wash to dry, we can come back and do a bit more work on these intake parts. These are the upper parts of the intakes, which have the bleed ramps on them. That's these separate parts. So these were movable by means of these jacks here, these parts. Now, one thing that we're going to have to do at this stage is just paint the forward edge. I've already done these in white, obviously. We need to do the forward edge in the airframe colour for each aircraft. Mine is going to be in gold grey, so one of them will be in gold grey. The other one is in ghost grey on the A. Now, the other thing in terms of masking for the intakes is that Tamiya provide us with some masking stickers to get the correct demarcation on the inside, because some of the fuselage colour comes onto the inside of the intake. So whilst we're doing all this work, we might as well do those sections as well. Okay, these are the masking stickers that Tamiya supply. You can see they're slightly different for the two kits, the A and the D. These are not die cut, so you can't just peel them off, you have to cut them out with a knife, but these will give us the correct demarcation on the inside of the intake for the camouflage colour that goes on the inside. Okay, so they're all masked off, and what I hadn't realised is that the sticker sheet for the A version doesn't include the intake masks. So what I've had to do, which has taken quite a while, is to use little strips of masking tape just to repeat that pattern. If I'd have realised, what I would have done was photocopy the D sheet and use the templates on the A. Anyway, it's all done now, and I'll get the camouflage colours applied to these intakes and we can get them built up. Okay, so back from the spray booth, we've got the intake parts painted up, and I'm using MRP paint for the main schemes on these two models, and I'm starting off with these two. For the D, which is an overall light gold grey, this is FS36440, so that's gone onto the inside of the intakes here where we've masked them up, and also the top surface here. The A is quite an unusual scheme really. It's mainly overall light ghost grey, which is 36375 FS number, with a dark ghost grey nose section. So MRP paint is pre-thinned. It just goes straight into the airbrush, just make sure the pigment is well mixed in, and it sprays on really well. This is my favourite paint. It's far better, it goes on far smoother, it's very forgiving, so if you get any slight bits of dust in it, it takes these sanding sponges, a fine grit sanding sponge, just to remove those, and it dries to a really nice smooth kind of eggshell finish really. So try them out if you've not used them, I'm sure you'll like them. The difference between light gold grey and light ghost grey is very, very subtle. The gold grey has got a slight caramel colour to it, I suppose you'd describe it as. Light ghost grey is a very pure grey, but you can see how close they are in shade. So I'm not going to unmask the A because I'm still slightly concerned with how much of this side panel I'm going to be removing. Hopefully I'm going to be able to preserve this internal intake wall, but we'll see. But I'm going to leave that masked up. The D we can unmask at this stage because I want to build the rest of the intake up. Hopefully the Tamiya masks have done the job. So that's nice and sharp. Those masks have worked really well. I'm happy with that. The other thing that I can do now is fit the Tamiya intakes. Okay, I want to come back to our undercarriage bays now, where I've flat coated all the parts after the weathering wash had dried. And I think what I'll do now is just go over these very lightly with a white dry brushing, just to bring out the highlights on them. Okay, they're all ready to go together now, so just clip them together and then use some extra thin just to bond them all. Now at this point we're directed to join the top and bottom fuselage elements, but before I do I just want to check the holes that we've got to drill in this bottom panel, mainly for the pylons, I think they are. So just a last check of the instructions and we're ready to join the fuselage top and bottom. Just clean up the mating surfaces, get the paint off. Also gives a bit of a key for the cement to bond into. Just another check fit, just want to be familiar with where the glue needs to go. Okay, that's not too bad. It's going to need some cleanup, but not too concerned about that. That all goes together really nicely. The undercarriage bays look okay. Considering that that's just out of the box, it'll be interesting to see how much difference these resin ones will make on the A. They're obviously quite a bit more work to them, but that's not a bad result. We're just going to leave that for a day just to set the glue, then we can do a little bit of cleanup on it. But I think that's been a useful lesson really about how the structure of the kit goes together before we start cutting things up to fit these resin bays. Okay, so moving on with the A. I want to get the undercarriage bays sorted out and get this fuselage, this rear fuselage, assembled. Now obviously I've moved on quite a bit. These are the resin bays from Minicraft Collection, and these are quite a bit of work to get to fit, and I've covered all that in a video over on Patreon where I've gone into quite a bit of detail about how to get these to work, and it involves quite a bit of cutting and surgery. It's not so much getting them to fit in here. This isn't too much of a problem because all we have to do is cut out this section of the Tamiya moulded bay. The problem is getting the cutouts done correctly on the intakes, because the bulkhead here on the Minicraft bay has to butt up to the Tamiya intake. Now we could just cut that whole section out if we wanted to. The problem with that is that you would have quite a bit of filling work to do because it's an exposed part of the intake on the inside. So basically what I've done is thinned half of the Tamiya plastic and half of the resin bulkhead, and they kind of just overlap once you've done that. So quite a bit of work, as I said, and that's over on Patreon in quite a bit more detail than I've just explained. So let's get these bays fitted. So it's a resin base, so I'm going to use some CA. Now there is a little bit more work to do to get these parts to fit, which I'll just explain. In terms of the top half of the fuselage, I'll explain that in a minute once I get these in. So just to make sure that these are nice and strong, I'm just blobbing some thick CA on the inside of the join there, and just use some cyano activator, and that sets it immediately. So they're nice and strong in the Tamiya plastic. Now the other work, just to catch up, that I've been doing is to fit the Minicraft Collection vents, and I'll show you those here. So we've got this pair at the back. Now these need to be carved out. You can see here the difference. This is the D, which is mine, and I've not fitted these vents, but they do look a little bit better than the Tamiya parts. I will give these a wash just to bring out the grill detail, but the resin parts are better. They're also here at the front. This is just a case of cutting out and filing the Tamiya plastic until you get a nice fit of those. Now there are also this pair on the underside which are a little bit tricky, because you can see that the plastic mould in here supports all this intake framework. So cutting this piece of plastic grill out does weaken that area quite a bit. So what I've done is gone straight back in and fitted the resin grills and a backing piece, just to make sure that you've reinstated the strength of the plastic. So the next thing to do is to fit the intake ramps, and again I'm going to use some CA for this. And you'll notice that I've already painted the exterior colour, which is light ghost grey. You're not going to be able to get into these afterwards, so they're all pre-painted. Now onto the intake trunkings. Okay, we'll get the intakes fitted. I'm just getting some CA on the inside of the resin wheel bay there, and hopefully when we slide the intake down we should be able to get those two faces bonded. You can also run a little bit of extra thin in there as well. Okay, time to join the upper and lower fuselage now, and one thing if you are fitting these wheelbays is that you need to remove these two screws. They do interfere with the top surface of the wheelbay at this point, so they need to come out, and we just need to glue this post here rather than use the screw. I suppose you could grind the head down, it's another alternative, but this plate's held in by another two screws, so it's not going to go anywhere at all. And as I said, that just gives a snug fit of the top fuselage. And the last test fit, which is still okay. So we'll get some glue on these two halves and get the upper and lower fuselage assembled on this A. This is a burner clamp, B-E-R-N-A, and it's really handy to reach into an area like that where we want to get this post set down properly. So I'm just going to leave that for a couple of hours to set up, and when it has, I'll come back and just do a little bit more gluing around the front of the intakes and here where the wing gloves are. The fuselage just wants pinching in a little bit. All this is because of all the resin that's gone into the central part of the fuselage. It's just moved it a little bit and tightened things up, and we just need to come back and sort that out in stages. Just glue it in stages and it'll eventually pinch together. Okay, before I go any further with the fuselage assembly, I just want to get the engine faces fitted. And really I should have put these in position before fitting the intakes here. Can still get them in through this gap. It probably would have been easier to do it beforehand. Now we've got two different types here. First of all, in the type of engine that there were, the A had these Pratt & Whitney engines in, and the D had the General Electric engine, an upgraded engine. And they're also different in that these are the standard Tamiya plastic parts for the D, and these are the engine faces that came with the intake set, with the seamless intakes on the A. Two part, as you can see. So let's get these assembled. We'll be putting these in with some CA. The paint that I've used on these, by the way, is AK Extreme Metal. In this case it's titanium, just applied over a black base. Now with the engine faces in position now, we can block these spaces up. We've got a couple of panels in here and a central panel on the underside. Okay, so that's the two models with the undersides done, or at least the underside panels fitted. They are different between the A and the D. The D went together without any trouble. The parts fit with the usual Tamiya precision. Had a bit more difficulty on the A, where we've got the resin wheel bay. That's just thrown things out a little bit, and it's just made the fit of these panels a little bit more problematic, but at least it's all together. Now, in terms of these wheel bays, they do look really nice, but personally I don't think they're worth the work that goes into fitting them and the difficulties that they can cause for the rest of the fit of the model. It will add at least 3 or 4 hours to the build fitting the resin bays, but for me, I'm happy enough with the kit wheelbase. I think by the time you get the doors on these, they'll look perfectly okay, particularly when the model's sitting in the cabinet. So the next job is to get the nose sections that I built in part 1, get those fitted. I have test fitted these before and they're a really nice fit. You can see how they just slide in, and it's kind of a plug effect here with this part of the nose. So they go together as though they were one part really. You can't really tell where the join is. It's on a natural panel line. The wings in the Tamiya kit are a straightforward top and bottom, just need bringing together. With no flaps, slats, air brakes, things like that to mess about with, which is fine by me. Okay, these are the vertical stabilizers and rudders in the kit. And this is the last piece of work that we need to do, last piece of surgery that we need to do anyway, on the A model. And that's because our A was retrofitted with these tail stiffeners at the top of the stabilizer. Now, what Tamiya have done here, and it's a bit unusual for a manufacturer to do this, is they've actually modified the sprue from the A. So the sprue in the A is blank, it's just a plain stabilizer, and they've actually modified the sprue to mould the reinforcement plating. So they're not alternative parts, these, which is unfortunate because we need the stiffeners on our A that were retrofitted to our aircraft. Now there's a couple of ways of rectifying that. The first way would be just to add some pieces of plastic card, but actually the shape of them is fairly complicated. It would be hard to get 4 identical parts, and they'd probably be difficult to get to look neat. So I'm going to be using this, which is a quick boost set 48831 for the tail reinforcement plates. So there's 4 pieces of resin and some tiny little pieces of photo etched brass. So that should bring the A tails up to the spec that we want. I'll put them together first though. Fortunately these are quite thin, so they're not going to be oversized, I don't think. I just want to scrape off the Tamiya detail first of all, just very gently. I don't want to go too far with this. Now this job would have been easier obviously had Tamiya supplied alternative parts in the kit. Just see if we can thin this resin down just a little bit. That's the stabilizer prepared, just got rid of all that raised detail. I just want to clear the panel lines out again before I lose them all together. Okay, so I've got another 3 of these to do, so I'll get on with that, and then for the end of the video we'll just pop all these parts on loosely just so that we can see what the airframe looks like. Okay, so I'm all done for this second episode. It's the airframe more or less constructed. There's 1 or 2 little bits and pieces to go on. I need to do a little research before I fit the tail at the back, just to make sure I'm putting the right one on for our aircraft. And apart from that, this is ready for some primer. This is the D, and the A, which as you've seen was a little bit more problematic, caused some gaps to appear here and there, but we'll sort those out in part 3 before we get the 2 models primed, and we'll start to do some painting next time. So they've gone pretty well. I'm glad we've got all the surgery out of the way and we can get on to the painting and finishing of these 2 models. So thanks for looking in, everybody. I hope that was of interest for you if you're building any of these kits and thinking of adding some of this aftermarket stuff that I have, particularly on the A variant, and that you'll come back and see how we get on in the next episode. Till then, look after yourselves, everybody, and enjoy your modelling. See you soon. Bye for now.